Dr. Sami, I have three questions to ask you. And first of them is what the economic policies will the new government need to revive the economy?
Well, that's a very big question with a very big answer. I think the immediate needs of the economy will have to be focused on relief, addressing the massive humanitarian crisis, addressing issues of the repatriation of people from within the country, from outside of the country. At the same time as the relief policies are being implemented, there has to be a kind of rollout of policies that serve to address the very structural and very real substantive consequences of Syria's war economy, everything ranging from the almost complete decimation of Syria's export capacity to the destruction of specific sectors such as industry and agriculture, and of course issues of unemployment, distribution of food and services, and essentially, revitalizing economies of provision. With that said, the ways in which the policies should be structured should focus specifically on addressing the humanitarian crisis as the kind of central goal. So, for example, many of the reconstruction plans, many of the assumptions of reconstruction, whether in Syria or in other countries, are simply that if you reach a set of kind of normative goals, then you will have something akin to relief and reconstruction. Unfortunately, the Syrian case is extremely unique and demands thinking not only on a kind of macro level, but on the micro level. And what this means is that we need to have kind of two sets of parallel policies, ones that are focused in the short term on relief and immediate reconstruction, so providing housing for people to come back to, enhancing distribution of food and services, incentivizing the return of refugees. Of course, these things have to happen immediately, but we also, the parallel set of policies are the long-term ones that focus on the rehabilitation of the economy and addressing the structural distortions that were caused by the war and prior to the war.
Okay. So, in your opinion, how should the private sector be engaged in the reconstruction process?
It's an interesting question because the private sector has been affected differently by the crisis. The Syrian private sector, the Syrian business community, is not a kind of homogenous entity. We have everything from extremely wealthy and regional elites to small family businesses and kind of everything in between in Syria. We have the urban business community, the rural business community, and of course everything in between. So to speak about the business community as kind of one entity is a bit problematic. So we have to unravel, if you will, the different slivers, the different segments of the business community. The overwhelming majority of Syrian private actors are what we would consider small and medium-sized enterprises. Many of these enterprises are loosely connected around family networks, where different members of family or people within a region are employed kind of in the same enterprise or are connected in some meaningful way to the enterprise through their family or through social connections. So I think revitalizing the possibilities for these smaller enterprises can actually serve to begin to address the relief and reconstruction needs as well, more specifically the kind of humanitarian crisis. The reality is that regardless of what political authority emerges after the violence stops or ceases or begins to subside, there will simply be insufficient funds, insufficient resources to address the reconstruction needs. The tax base in Syria is weak, the tax administration is weak, even in the event that oil production is brought back to anything resembling pre-revolution capacity, the revenues will not be enough to be channeled towards reconstruction, and all the other kind of revenues that are available to political authorities will simply not be enough. So the private sector, the business community, will play, without a doubt, a kind of central role. The concern here, of course, is how the Syrian private sector, as the kind of indigenous business community that knows the country best, that is most knowledgeable in the problems in the Syrian economy, can be activated during reconstruction. Certainly there will be private sector interest from neighboring countries, Turkey, the Gulf, Lebanon, Jordan, who will have an interest in reconstruction and who will have capacities that perhaps many in the Syrian business community will not have. The challenge, I think, here is ensuring that they're not stifled, that the Syrian business community is not stifled by the entry of private sector interests from around the country.
That's an important point. What sectors of the economy should be focused on first in the rebuilding effort, and if you could tell me why?
That's a tough one because it's almost putting giving greater value to one sector over another. I certainly can't help but think that agriculture has to be centralized in a meaningful way for a number of reasons. One is that the agricultural regions are the ones that were the most hardest hit. Agriculture was also a sector that employed well over 1 million Syrians. Its contribution to overall economic activity had been declining over years, but this was largely in response to government neglect, drought, things of that nature. So there's a real possibility, again, of addressing simultaneously the revitalization of the agricultural sector and the humanitarian crisis by focusing, reversing the decade of policy neglect of agriculture would certainly be beneficial. The challenge, of course, is to build on those sectors that are labor intensive, that can provide employment opportunities for Syrians, that can provide room for growth and expansion of enterprises. In the industrial sector, for example, one of the challenges might not be in finding markets for industrialists, but actually rebuilding their physical capacity. So finding ways in which to rebuild the machinery, rebuild the factories, things of that nature that were damaged, stolen, whatever during the course of the revolution. So I think that it's it certainly wouldn't be in anyone's interest to focus specifically on one or two sectors. Each sector needs its own specific set of responses, but I certainly think that the agricultural sectors and the industrial sectors that seem to have been the most hardest hit would be targets for initial reconstruction policies.